Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marcus. Glad to be here.
Oh, excited to talk to you today. So let's get started with a quick introduction of yourself and your company, TextRequest.
Yeah, so again, my name is Brian Elrod. I am the CEO and co-founder of TextRequest, based in Chattanooga, Tennessee. TextRequest has been around since 2014. We celebrated 10 years in October, and we were acquired in October of 2024.
Right on the 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, when I actually got into this business, everyone told me before you would exit at 7 to 10 years, and you know what? They were right on it. 10 years. They nailed the timeline. When you get into something, it's you got to dedicate your life to it for that amount of time.
And once you started, did you have that idea that it was going to, I guess that was good to kind of set the expectations that, hey, I'm going to be working on this thing for a long time.
Right. I probably didn't start thinking out that way. It's good knowledge. As I got into it, I started to learn. And I became, obviously more patient along the way because we knew we had to hit certain milestones. And there's a lot of data out there about SaaSes and what they should be doing and, a healthy SaaS and how your revenue should be building. And we use that information. I guess I didn't look at the timeline before we started. I was more focused on the business of the concept and how it could solve, customer problems. And once we had something and we knew we were moving in the right direction, I probably was like, oh, I'm going to be in this a minute. So
once that clarity kind of came as you learned more. So Brian, before selling the business, is there any metrics that you can share about the business so that the audience understands a bit of what the size of TextRequest was?
Yeah, so TextRequest is a bootstrap SaaS technology business. Our final year in business, we were about 18 million in reoccurring revenue, just short of 20. And again, it took us 10 years to get there. But that's about 40, 45 employees at the time of the exit, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Awesome. And let's go back to the founding story. How did you come up with the idea for TextRequest?
Yeah, so TextRequest, my wife and I were actually in a restaurant, and we are entrepreneurs. We had owned a couple of businesses, startup business. They were not tech, but they were, businesses we started from scratch. So we obviously experienced entrepreneurs. And we were in a restaurant. We had a toddler actually that was having a toddler moment. And we were like, it'd be great if we could just text someone, and they could see it at a server station or in the back part of the restaurant and be able to get us what we needed. And anyone could see it and where we were setting. So it really started as an inbound customer service tool. Now, it's taken many pivots along the way as we listen to our customers. But that was the initial concept, was messaging for customer service inside of a restaurant.
Okay. And then how did you guys go about building that initial product?
So the way that we did that was I had just enough experience with software in another business where I didn't actually build it or have a co-founder, but I basically scripted the software exactly how I wanted it to work in a prior franchising business. And I hired software engineers and they built the business. So what I've learned is everything that I've done has helped me where I'm at today, right? All of those experiences, because part of that we'll talk about, I was in the franchising business, which later became one of our big customer bases. But oddly enough, the business that failed was a business where we built this software and it was used in the concept. It was a consignment business for selling basically sporting good equipment. But we hired a software engineer, hired a software consulting firm, built the software. So I had enough experience to know when we started TextRequest that I needed a technical co-founder. I needed someone bought in, right, to the business. And the way that we went about it was we gave them a third of the business, 33% equity position for their basically dedication of their time. And we would fund the business. So that's kind of how, we started our partnership. It obviously worked. And, that was the beginning.
So you had an idea of how to build software with that previous experience. You understood that you needed a technical co-founder to go and build this product and get it off the ground. What sort of things did you look for in finding a co-founder? Because obviously it's a huge thing to give a third of the business to somebody, and there
Sure.
has to be a lot of trust there. And as we talked about a bit before, it's a long-term endeavor. So what kind of things were you looking for when you selected a technical co-founder?
Well, I wanted someone that, we could meet face to face, right? So something that was important to me at that particular time in 2012-ish, when we first started talking to people, I was hoping for someone fairly close by. And we kind of had in Chattanooga, Tennessee, there's a startup community here. We're pretty close to Georgia Tech, which is, well known for its computer engineering program. And I really had hoped I could get someone close where I could sit down with them, a couple of times a week. We could talk, that sort of thing. So the way it started was I just started word of mouth around town. Who's the best software engineer in town? Like, who do you recommend? Who's in the startup scene? And I started just interviewing people. And when I met our technical co-founder, Rob Reagan, there were a lot of connections there. He got the concept. He was also in the right time of his life to do this. I mean, timing and where you're at in life, that's a big part of any entrepreneur startup, right? And so all of those things matched up. The personalities, his time in his life where he was at to do a startup. And as we got deeper into it, we even realized there were more connections. Like his mother was one of our children's teachers, and we had no clue about that, right? So, um, but and trust, like as a co-founder, we went back and forth, and we certainly had our battles and wars over the years, but we always trusted each other, and that trust thing is a significant thing in a business partnership.
100%. And being able to respectfully disagree and just work through it. You can go back to friendships and relationships, the same sort of thing. You want to be able to challenge each other and understand that things aren't personal, and then be able to grow together.
Right. Absolutely.
So, in the early days, I would love to understand, you talked about timing right then. So, were you currently running another business when you started TextRequest, or how did that transition work?
Yeah. So I was actually involved in another startup that was doing consignment. It was running consignment events for sporting gear. So you rent places, and everyone in the community would bring in their sporting gear and sell it, and we would use the software that we developed to track barcodes and payouts and all of that sort of thing. But I had been in that about 2 years, and when we came up with TextRequest, you have to start putting value on your time, and because time's a precious commodity, right? And bottom line is we just decided to cut the other business loose because we saw a lot more value in TextRequest than what it could be. While text messaging had been around since the early 90s, it was really the early beginnings of business messaging. And the opportunity we could tell was pretty large because very few businesses were using messaging, but they all needed it, right? So we just dumped the other business and said that this is a better use of our time. This has more potential. And we moved as fast as we could.
That's awesome. That's a big
We'd like
move
to
to
move a
take.
lot faster, but sometimes I also learned in a startup, especially a tech, sometimes you have to be patient. It's aggressively patient that you have to be super aggressive, but you got to build, and we're constantly building and listening to customers. But um, yeah, that's how that happened.
There's a great quote by this guy. He's an angel investor. He's pretty big on Twitter. His name's Naval, and he says impatient with actions and then patience with results. And it's like you got to do the thing with urgency, and then but the results aren't going to come right away.
That's right.
So let's go back to the early days of. So you had your background in franchise businesses, and then you started TextRequest. And the ideal customers of TextRequest, who are they exactly? I know they're around the franchising model. So who were those early customers, and what market did you focus on at the beginning?
Right. So uh, there are a couple of pivots in here, Marcus. I mean, we really started as a customer service tool, right? And so we were targeting, like hotels and that for customer service and guest interactions. Um, and in the beginning, you could only, to start a conversation, the customer had to text in. The business couldn't start. I mean, that was later changed as we listened to our customers. But, in the beginning, hotels, hospitality, restaurants, that was a lot of our focus. And then as we really got into the model, we were like, hey, like the franchise industry needs to communicate with their customer base. So home service franchises was a big part of it. Like being a tech business, the first year, I spent most of my time trying to raise money. Um, I was terrible at it, by the way, failed miserably. What I learned with raising money is every time we'd get a commitment, they had put stipulations on it to find other money. And so there's this connection, right, with raising money. And it was just continuously a next step or next thing that needed to happen. Luckily for us, came out of the franchising business, and one day with our sales team, I was like, hey, this is going to work really well in the franchising home service business. And so our sales team started targeting those type of businesses, and revenue started taking off. So we ended up saying, hey, let's stop trying to chase investors around and just chase customers. And ultimately, what happened is our revenue ended up funding the business, which is the absolute place you want to be at. Because as we went to, sell the business 10 years later, it was obviously much more advantageous position as owners. So yeah, but being in the franchise world, I understood how it worked. Getting into a franchise or's offices is really hard with a startup technology. So we called it the bottom up approach. We would get franchisee locations using our software because they would see the value of texting with their customers and how much faster they could, set up an appointment or close a deal or make a payment or, whatever it was, get in touch with their, field operators. And so they saw the value really quick. And then you would get one of those on board. They would tell, obviously, their peers about it. You'd have 2, 3, 4 more on board. And then when you got enough, you could go from a top down approach and go after the franchisor, right? So we were working the bottom up and the top down at the same time. Um, when I left the business or, sold the business in October, we probably had 4,000 franchise locations using TextRequest. Probably half of our businesses or accounts were in that area, in that industry.
That's amazing. So you guys would start at the store level or the franchise level. And I
Right.
guess that could work out as sort of a case study when presenting to the larger organization.
That's
Hey,
exactly what happened. Yes.
and did that lead then to some massive growth after selling to the whole organization? Would you guys scale up from 3, 4 stores to maybe dozens pretty
In the
quickly?
in the best case scenario, yes. which did happen multiple times over the years. That process did take months to, up to a year sometimes to completely, work its way out. And then the franchise industry is while it's a huge industry, it's based on, it's not a big industry by people, right? So it's a lot of the same people. So, we do all of the things like go to the trade shows and to the IFA, and so where you become a trusted brand. So there's all of these pieces moving. And then we, obviously from a marketing, we started content and, anything to do with franchising and messaging, we were the experts, right? So, yeah, all of that stuff took years to hit, but then you start seeing the impact of all of that. It's not fast, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I want to dive into the marketing and sales strategies. But before that, I'd love to know when you guys, so let's say you started with 3 or 4 franchises. And I haven't worked in a franchise before. I'm not too familiar with that kind of business. But my understanding is that a franchise, they have the same systems and processes across all the locations. Is that correct?
That's generally right. Yes.
Okay. I'm sure there's some nuance because
Yeah.
obviously nothing is that simple.
It all
But
depends on how good of a, like friend. Well, there's always nuances, right? Some are
yeah,
very strict, like a McDonald's, right? How everything has to be exact, and then other franchises are not. So it's individualized.
okay. Because what I'm trying to get to with this question is understanding if you already have 3 or 4 locations that are that have started using TextRequest, I'm sure they are developing their own systems of how they're integrating that into their business. And then I'd imagine as I'm trying to understand the scaling challenges there of going from 3 or 4 to possibly dozens. But I'm trying to think maybe with the franchise model, you guys had a pretty good system in place that you could replicate to the other franchises once you sold into those.
Yes. Uh, so what you really have to do, like what franchisees are most concerned about, Marcus, is making money.
Yeah.
They're owner operators, they're small businesses, and they want to figure out how to make more money. Um, so a lot of times they depend on their franchisor for help, obviously, but because they're all business people, they look for their own opportunities as well. And that's how we position TextRequest. Look, because you're able to connect instantly, you're going to make more revenue and you're going to make more profit. And, try it out. And so they would, and then it would spread to the next one and so forth. But that's the biggest thing.
Are you able to provide me with, because I really want to understand how text request was used in a business. So are you able to provide me with an example case study of how somebody was able to use text requests and drive more revenue for their franchise?
Sure. So let's just take a maid service, for example. Uh, One of their biggest things is setting appointments and confirming appointments. So if you're calling and you can't reach someone, where you could send a text and confirm the appointment, or another great thing is backfilling their cancellations, right? So let's say, at the beginning of the day, you have a person that cancels their appointment or the day before, and then you have a wait list and you can instantly fill it by sending a text to 5 of their customers. That was hugely valuable to them. Um, because time is money. They only have so many slots a day. They have to pay their employees. So you would take that concept and you know what? That works at a dentist office. That works at a maid company. It just goes, multiple businesses. And it took us a minute to figure out how important that the revenue side. Now, something that I learned is that everybody talks about really good customer service and everyone wants to supply customer service, but they don't spend money in software as fast on customer service as they do for software that grows their revenue and their profits, right? So, uh, in the beginning, remember, we were a customer service software, but we switched to, more a sales software, right? And so to grow revenue. But yeah,
So I'm sure the transition, there's obviously a change in messaging there. But do you believe that some of the, I guess, the hesitancy to invest in a customer service software instead of a revenue driving generating one is the fact that you cannot, or it could be a bit harder to obviously see how much more revenue the customer service side is generating as compared to attacking revenue itself?
absolutely. And especially for SMBs, which was our main target. In an enterprise level, I think that you can probably show the value faster or the ROI faster. Because we later as we got much larger and we had 50,000 daily users of TextRequest, I think when I left, that was about what our average was. We obviously, would invest in customer service software at that point. But for the first 7 or 8 years, that wasn't a value to us because we were so focused on the marketing software, all the different ones that were driving revenue. So the same thing in a small business. Um, but yes, they put small SMBs put a ton of value on their bottom line,
Mhm.
and they recognize it much easier with revenue and profits than they would customer service.
Okay. And then, so I believe I heard in the one of the other podcasts you were on that it took about 5 years to hit 1 million ARR, and then things started to skyrocket from there. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, I think it was a little short of 5 years, but still roundabout. And obviously, uh, to be exact with you, I think it took us about 3.5 years to get to a million in the first million, which I can tell you is a roughly $86,000 a month in MRR because because we cared so much about that number.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, and then I believe the way that happened was it took 3.5, 4 years, and then in 1 year we added another, million ARR, and then we added 3 million the next year. So it really, once you can really define how to obtain your customers, the process that's most important to your customers, and you have a tool they need, then the snowball really starts to move, right? It's so hard to push it in the beginning. You feel like you're always pushing uphill, and then once you nail it, it starts moving much faster.
So that's what I want to dive into now is what changed there? Was that having that sales and marketing strategy really locked in and just being able to repeat that process at a larger volume that you hadn't been able to previously? Or what changed there to allow that massive growth after that 3.5 year mark?
Knowledge.
Yeah.
That's number one because you always start a business and you think and you think and you really don't know, and then you mix it up into the business and you're really talking with customers and you're understanding what they need, what their struggles are, how they're using your application. So we start over time really gaining all of this knowledge. Now we have to put it in place, right? So we see all of these opportunities. Um, you know, we became a lot bigger than messaging software because we added SMS chat engagement from the website, payment solutions, revenue review solutions, all of these things that customers told us about. Hey, this would be great. Yes, they were all kind of based on messaging and they were all related, but you just listen and you start getting new and opportunities. Um, and you got to be in the game. There were a lot of times that I would say, hey, we were lucky, and we were. There were some just absolutely lucky moments for us. But if we were not in the game, we were not listening to customers, and we were not developing relationships, some of our luck came from our great relationships that we developed with our vendors. Like our largest vendor at the, at most of the entire 10 years was a company called Twilio, which a lot of people know that. It's a unicorn company in messaging. And basically, they were one of our upstream providers. And we got to a point where we were selling, hey, we are a canned solution for Twilio, because Twilio had offered no softwares. It was all API, right? And SMBs, they don't have developers. They can't use Twilio for the most part. So we were selling a plug and play version of Twilio, essentially. And Twilio saw the value in that. And guess what? They started sending customers to us. But we had those relationships, and we went to the Twilio conferences, and we developed. All of this stuff takes time, but you've got to build relationships, listen to customers, look for opportunities. And once you're in the game, then things can happen. These big things can happen for you.
That's amazing. Yeah, as a developer, I've used the Twilio API many times. So I've built into previous companies I've worked for. We've used that to send messages, but yeah, all working with API. So it's super interesting that you guys developed that relationship and they were able to send you customers afterwards.
Right, we did, and we knew most of the C-suite folks at Twilio personally, and here we were in the beginning of this little company, but we grew into one of their larger customers at 10 years into it. So
I want to dive into the basically your perspective and understanding your customers. As you mentioned there, you built features by listening to customers' feedback. And I know you've been a big proponent of constantly giving customer demos as the CEO, and even as you were years into running the company. So when you're giving these demos, what sort of things are you looking to learn from your customers? What sort of questions do you ask? And how do you talk to customers in a way that you can take their feedback and understand that, hey, this is good feedback that we can go and build a feature to help them here? Because a lot of times is customers can say something and they might be alluding to a problem they have, but perhaps it's not the exact problem. And you kind of have to do a little bit of that deeper thinking to understand it. So I'd love to hear about your process and how you go about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Marcus, we did build solutions that the customer didn't need. I mean, over time, right? Because you always do that. We thought the customer needed this, but our goal was to, learn from that very quickly and minimize those and make sure that we, hit the bullseye when we build products. That was one of the reasons that I always did customer demos. I certainly, it went down over the years, but 9 years into it, I was probably still doing 1 or 2 demos a day. Sometimes they were just overflow demos. Sometimes they were large customer opportunities. But the art of the demo is a big thing. And, it's probably not human nature to run a demo the right way. And, we would hire new account executives and all they would want to do is talk. Well, really, all you need to do is listen. So we would develop key features or key questions like, and ask the customer, what's, most important to you? What do you want to see happen in this part of the process? How would this help you? And they would always give us the information, right? The features we would build, like the Chrome extension, which it seems, 10 years ago, it wasn't a well-known tool, right? Well, we just want TextRequest just to drop down and use it with any software we're using, right? And, that was a huge product for us. And it really helped us because everyone wants an integrated solution, but integrations aren't that easy. Especially there's so many softwares out there and, there's a lot of development and really doing a native integration. And just by listening to the customer describe how they would like for it to work, the Chrome extension, the TextRequest Chrome extension was huge because it would overlay right on any software they were using. And it was like a true integration. So that's one example of that. But listening was the key and asking how the workflow, what would be meaningful to them. And
And then,
as the CEO, I always did those. I always valued those conversations. We always tracked requests. We always talked about them. Our success team really valued that feedback. we just didn't ask for it. We really valued it.
And then when you were going about giving a lot of demos, so you said you were doing 1, 2 a day towards the end of your time as CEO. So I imagine it was many more earlier on. And then maybe that's between different team members as well. How would you guys work to consolidate all of the information and feedback that you were getting from customers and actually bring that into something that you would build into a product like the Chrome extension?
Yeah, that that obviously evolved a lot over time, right? And how we tracked and requested, and a product finally made it to the roadmap, right? Uh, in the beginning, we could add these product or these features when we were small so quick, and as you get bigger and more customers and more UI to think about and worry about, like adding products seems so slow in features. But um, you know, we always talked about them as a team with our success team, our sales team, our dev team. Uh, we were always together as well. Like we were not a remote setup. Uh, I know a lot of people are big fans of remote, but we were not. We were always believed that there's a lot of value, especially for being in a young company, to being around each other. Uh, and so you're constantly talking about things. And then it got more formal as we got bigger, and how we would, bring features and request, doing a lot of competitor analysis and what was out in the marketplace. And um, so that's a real complicated question that really just comes down to constant communication between teams. Um, until, now we have much bigger products. We use SaaSes to monitor and help with that. We're a SaaS company, but we're probably using 10 other SaaSes, right? And, probably more than that to help manage the business.
Yeah, it's crazy nowadays, even with the podcast, the amount of software that I use. And then I'm using a lot of AI now as well to process transcripts and help me create content around it. So that's the one thing I was thinking of as well is I know you guys started before, for example, ChatGPT was a big thing.
Mhm.
But now
Yeah.
I see these tools and it's like you can process so much data now with these tools if you know how to program them. I'll say program because prompt engineering, you are programming these things to give you a result. But there's so many tools nowadays to process data. So I was wondering, yeah, if that was something perhaps you guys have used as well, especially if you have dozens of calls that you're trying to analyze.
We haven't. We haven't been an early adopter of AI. We talked about it a lot. Our customers would talk about it, and we would, really dig into specifically what they would want. We could very rarely get a straight answer on exactly what AI would look like to them. Now, just really in the last 6 months, it's really, in my opinion, as far as down to the average SMB and consumer, I think it's come a long way in how the intelligence is being used. But early on, like 3 years ago, I'm like, how would you want to use it? How would you want it to work? And it was usually just a blank answer. So that is something that we couldn't, react on and build on because we didn't have specifics exactly of how they would get value out of it and how we would charge for it. Um, I think now we're probably getting closer to that as I'm actually exiting the business. But yeah, um, that's one of those that we're patient on.
Yeah, it's super important. Even I work in software, so I'm pretty familiar with the tools. In the last 6 months or so, I've really started investing in different AI tools for my own workflows. But it's exactly as you said. A few years ago, I was taking a prompt engineering course, and it was cool. I got to learn how to write cool prompts, but I didn't understand at that time how to integrate that into my workflow. And
Right.
then with the podcast now, for example, I've started using it a bit more now to help me produce content around it, help me write descriptions and titles faster. But also that the ability to do that and actually have something decent that the AI gives me came from producing 10 episodes and having sort of a record of data of things that of my writing style, the kind of content I produce, and then be able to train a specific AI on that to help me produce things in the future. So it is interesting how it's this great technology, but you have to really understand the problem you're trying to solve in order to use it
Exactly.
effectively.
So we're having success internally with a lot of our sales tools and things that we're using, but we haven't rolled out an AI product in our messaging platform just yet. And that's, I can't release a lot of details about that, but I think we're getting close to being able to have some valuable products for our customers as well.
Awesome. So I'd like to transition to the acquisition story. Any details that you could share about that and what the future is looking like for you? So TextRequest was acquired in October of last year. Can
Yes.
you share kind of the lead up to that process? Was selling the company something that you were looking to do, or was it an opportunity that came out of nowhere? And how did that process start?
So, the process of exiting a company is usually long. I'm sure there's some fast, quick, clean stories out there, but Comify, a UK-based company, I think they first contacted us in 2021, and we were officially acquired in 2024. So you can see, a 3+ year timeline. Um, and I'm sure there's a lot, a swing and misses where, they're just trying to Comify reached out to us. And what I mean by that is they probably reached out to a lot of people and they wanted to have a relationship and they were looking to expand into the US market. Um, and, we actually, I guess it was 2023, we decided to run what is called a process with an investment banker and get out into the world. And unfortunately, the market wasn't totally right that year. Um, and Comify actually did not submit what we would call a bid. Um, and due to the market, and how great our business was performing, we're like, you know what, let's just pump the brakes on this. We'll try again another time. And in 2024, we tried again. It was the right time for Comify, who had also been going through a private equity situation. We're back to that timing thing, right? Timing's
Yeah.
important. Timing aligned for them and it aligned for us. And we were able to, close on the deal in October. But for us, it's just, it was a lot, it's, you get so excited when you get an LOI on one that you and the founders uh, agree to, and then 8 months later you close the deal. So there's lot of lot of moving pieces, but yeah, a lot of experience of going through the process. I've definitely learned, and I wish I could reuse that experience. A matter of fact, at some point, because it's just a lot of things that we picked up on.
I have a good friend out here, and he sold his business a few years ago. And I've asked him about the process, and he said for that whole duration, I believe his process was about a year, and he ran the business for maybe 16 years. And he said that whole year was like having two full-time jobs because you got to run the business. You have to make sure the business does well, but then it's all this extra stuff you have to do to prepare for that transition.
Yes, it is grueling because, a lot of times you will have a part of an earnout, right, to the acquisition. And you certainly, when you're going through the acquisition and there's so much time that's being dedicated to it, you can't not perform either. You need the business overperforming. So yes, it, it's a grueling process, and you do have two jobs during that time period, and it can go on for months, if not a year or two.
So what's next for you, Brian? TextRequest recently got acquired. I'm sure your role has changed since that time, but what's the vision going forward?
Yeah, so I in other times when I've done business, and sold businesses, and I usually need a few months just to get my head cleared, right, and bring the energy back. And I am going through the wind down phase now of the acquisition. We had a short employment agreement that I'm working through right now. But at some point, I will take a minute and clear my head, and then I'm sure I'll be looking for another opportunity. Um, and won't be in the messaging space, but we'll see what industry it's in.
Awesome. So, Brian, as we start to wind down here, I'd love to go back and just really understand some of your experience and what advice you give to other founders. So, obviously, you have decades of entrepreneurial experience. There's a very happy ending here with TextRequest. What's the number one piece of advice that you give to young founders looking to start their first businesses?
Yeah, uh, don't worry about failures. Obviously, you're going to learn a lot in those. Uh, there's so many opportunities to get experience. Something that does concern me are really young founders that start businesses and they've not had many experiences, right? So when I go back and I look at all of my successes, they came from other things, right? Uh, and actually, all of my businesses were tied to a kid somehow. Like the ideal came from the kid. But just paying attention. But if I had to, I guess, give one piece of advice, Marcus, don't be afraid to pivot fast, and follow the revenue, because in my opinion, revenue solves all problems. If you don't have revenue, I don't care how good your engineering team or how good your tech is, uh, find the revenue, because that's what makes you king of the hill.
Revenue first. And when you said related to kids, did you mean like having your own kids and
Now
that gave you?
yeah, I have three boys, right? And my
Okay.
first one, we started a school uniform franchise, and this is because he had school uniforms. And then the next thing, we blew it into a national brand that had franchises all over the country. But it's because he needed a school uniform, right? The second one was heavily involved in sports, and we, started a sporting good consignment business that was based on franchising, because I'd been in franchise. So all this stuff started to build. And the third one was TextRequest, and it had, because of a child was, acting bad at a restaurant. So, that's where all three of those concepts started, were from children, essentially. So,
Oh, that is amazing. So, Brian, where can people go to learn about you online if they want to catch up with you and yeah, learn more about you?
yeah, I guess LinkedIn would, you can always hit me up on LinkedIn. I don't have a Brian Elrod website or anything like that, but that probably is where I would start.
Awesome, perfect. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show.
All right, Marcus, thank you for having me.